Don't give because you think it's going to manipulate God. Don't give less than a certain amount just because you think you can justify it. God's smarter than that. He sees through your games. Give out of your heart. Give out of joy. Give out of gratitude. That's what God requires.
Welcome to Stewardology, a podcast where two worlds collide. In this show, financial advisor Tim Russell and Pastor Drew Gysi are joined by me, producer Tyler Rutherford, to explore the intersection of financial stewardship and theology. Their unique perspectives help Christians and churches understand and apply a biblical framework for everyday financial decisions so Christians everywhere can grow in their walk with Christ through biblical stewardship. Before we get started, we just wanted you to know that the topics discussed in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations. Investment and investment strategies involve risk, including the potential loss of principal, and past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities and advisory services are offered through Genius Wealth Management, member FINRA, and SIPC. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Tim Russell, Drew Gysi, and Tyler Rutherford.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Stewardology Podcast. I'm Tyler, and I'm here with my co-host, Tim Russell.
Good to be here.
And Drew Gysi.
Hello there, everybody.
Today, we're tackling a question that many Christians, especially in America, have been trying to tackle for a long time. Do you tithe on the gross income or the net income? And it seems like a silly question at first, and it sounds like purely a math question or financial question. But I think as we look into this question a little further, we'll see that there's a deeper heart issue that underlies it. So are we seeking to give faithfully to honor the Lord, or are we trying to figure out the minimum amount that's acceptable to God, gross or net? I would be lying if I said I never thought about this question, right? Because there is a dramatic difference between what your paycheck says you earn and what you actually take home many of the times. So certainly something to think about. But as we get into this episode, we'll dive into some of those heart questions that we need to consider. And Jesus, going back to Matthew 23, he warned the Pharisees about this kind of precise calculation that misses the bigger picture. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others." So today, we're going to talk about both sides. We're going to define gross, net, in case you don't know what that is. We'll give you a little way to remember which is which, and we'll talk about whether or not you should give on the gross or the net, or does it even matter? So as we get into it, what is our biblical foundation for this topic?
The Old Testament is our pattern, right? We give the first and we give the best. That's the first fruits principle. So we see this, we talked about this in last week's episode with Proverbs 3, 8, and 9. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all of your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty. Your vats will be bursting forth with wine. In the New Testament, we see the focus shifts from a strict law to a grace-filled, cheerful giving methodology. So in 1 Corinthians 16:2, it says, "On the first day of the week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income." Some sort of amount of proportionality. The idea then is like you don't have much, you don't have to give much, but you make a lot, you should give a lot. And there's something to that, but I still think, again, doesn't mean that we don't start with the foundational assumption of 10% and give as your income supports and allows you to. 2 Corinthians 9, 6, and 7 says, "Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he's decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." I think these are our biblical assumptions. Again, you can look at last week's discussion for more details. So we probably should transition, though, into gross versus net. Can you give us some good mental hacks to remember what's the difference between gross and net?
Yes, your gross income is your total earnings before any deductions, taxes, insurances, retirement benefits, before any of that is taken out, that's what your gross is. And your net is what you actually take home. So here's a good way to remember it. Gross. The ocean with everything in it is gross. Think about everything in there. You don't know what is in there, but it is gross. The net is when you go fishing with the net, and that's what you take home with you in your fishing net. So gross, that's everything. Net is what you take with you.
Well, the big thing we need to put before not just us, but our listening audience is, why is this question being even asked? Why are we asking, is it gross? Is it net? And I hear this often in the seminars when we're doing our personal stewardship reviews. I like to say first, you're asking the wrong question. Really, that's what you're doing. Are you looking for the minimum amount that God's going to be happy with and be blessed with and be honored with, that God would accept? Are you looking for that minimum possibly?
What's the minimum amount I can give and still be in God's good favors?
And, to the penny, tell me what that number is. I want to make sure we do that. When we get too just worked up about this net versus gross, we risk being like those Pharisees. Mm-hmm. We're tithing spices while neglecting all the more weightier, more important, more gracious things that we need to be focused on.
We tithe on our mint rack, spice rack, rather than on doing the things that really matter.
And many of us have some nice spice racks, so let's just call it the way we see it there. So, you probably do, Tim. You like cooking. So.
Oh man, I have lots of spices.
Yeah,
I don't tithe out of my garden. I don't. I do tithe out of my income,
Amen.
Which goes to support the garden. And believe me, I'm putting more money in that garden than I'm getting out in produce. Let's put it that way.
Well, this gross versus net question, it's not unimportant, especially with how dramatic the difference can be here in America with our taxes and all the deductions. But I think when you focus so much on the math, you're actually missing out on what God is doing in your heart through giving and through generosity. But I think, let's say you're tithing 10%, but you're like just trying to meet the minimum standard. You're just tithing on the net and you're so focused on just meeting that standard. I don't think that's doing as much in your heart as actual sacrificial giving and realizing, maybe you're not quite giving 10%, but it is sacrificial. And you're saying, I want to give to the Lord out of a cheerful heart and I want to see what God is going to do. That kind of giving, I think, has tremendous value in seeing what God actually does in you versus just going like this legalistic, I got to check the box.
I can firsthand testify for my wife and I remember when we were early on in our marriage, we were calculating that 10%. And I forget whether we were doing gross or net. We were probably doing net is my guess at that time because we didn't have much income. I quit my job to go to school full time. So we were trying to make ends meet. And I remember when we stopped the calculation and started the giving, that changed something in here. That changed something in the heart and in the mind where we weren't so dogmatic on the dollar and we were focused on the kingdom impact that we can make in our church through our generosity. That to me, I saw that firsthand. Yeah. And I will even say that's even today, my wife and I, we are giving generously to our church. And as we give, it's because we love the kingdom impact. It's not about what we can hold back. It's what we can do to help the kingdom expand.
Let me play devil's advocate for a minute, Drew, because my fear is that people are going to hear that and say, well, that must mean you're doing a lot of giving and your gifts have a greater impact on the kingdom because you're giving more money. But I'm the widow with the two half pennies, and I'm going to give my 2 half pennies to the church, and that it's not really going to have that. The church ain't going to miss it. Like, it's not going to have that big of an impact. So because my gift is small and it's not going to have an impact, it doesn't matter, and I shouldn't have to give. But people who give more, they have a greater impact, and therefore they should give. The devil's advocate there. The answer that I would have to myself would be, well, one of the reasons we give is because of the kingdom impact of the gift and the fact that God uses even small gifts for big purposes. Remember the story of the little kid who gave his lunch, a couple pieces of bread and a couple fish, and God fed 5,000. So God has the way of multiplying your tiny gifts to make big impacts. Little gifts matter. But also, if that impact is like a mental obstacle for you and you can't figure out how to get over that, I would tell you, we don't give primarily because my gift is going to have such a big impact. We give, there is an impact component. I'm not saying you don't consider that, but we give out of gratitude. You give out of your meager stuff because you love Jesus, because you saw what he did for you, because he was rich, he became poor so that you being poor can become rich. Yes, I want to give to him. And then we also give to break the power of money in our lives. And it's important for my own spiritual growth and development and my own breaking of the power of money and greed in my heart and my life that I'm giving. So whether it's a lot or a little, proportionately, it's the same amount, 10%, that helps to break that power for me. So yeah, you can look at the impact. The impact is good, but also look at the bigger issues, the bigger reasons, and not to diminish the fact that we give out of obedience because God calls us to be givers. So we give out of obedience, we give out of gratitude, we give out of a desire to break the power of money in our lives. All of these are legitimate reasons why we give, even if our gift is so small that we don't think it's going to have any meaningful impact in the kingdom. First of all, that probably is not true. Remember the story of the loaves and the fishes. But also there are other reasons to give that you can be motivated by.
So for the sake of answering the question here, the gross versus net, let's give some arguments for tithing on gross income. Remember, gross is before any deductions. This is like your total pay before anything is removed. What are some arguments for tithing on the gross?
Well, let me jump in because I know last episode we talked about the Malachi 3:10 verse. In the beginning of that verse, it says, bring the full tithe into the storehouse. Full, not partial, not a portion, full tithe. So I think that's a good place. It's saying, here is the fullness of it. Bring that portion to the storehouse. Bring that portion to your local church's general fund. That's one that I kind of look at.
I think that's helpful. We can also look at the argument for increase. Our version of increase in modern terms starts with gross income. This is how much my entire compensation package is. So my salary, before my health insurance is taken out, before taxes are taken out, before 401k is taken out, we tithe on that because that's our increase. Maybe another argument for this is the first fruits principle that we talked about from Proverbs 3:9-10, where we said, give to the Lord of your wealth of the first fruits. The first fruits is before anything else comes out, right? You give out of the first fruits, which doesn't necessarily clearly teach tithing, but it does teach priority, like the priority of giving before anything else comes out of your increase.
That's good. So now let's flip the coin and look at arguments for tithing on the net, which, if you remember from earlier, is what you actually take home.
Well, since your net income is actually the money that's available for you for spending purposes, some say, well, look, the taxes, that's Caesar's portion. So you give to Caesar that which is Caesar and give to God that which is God. So, you give the money that you actually have to spend and you give to Caesar the money that he requires. It still requires a little bit of math because you got to think about health insurance and 401k and things like that, extra deductions, insurances and so forth, like life insurances and accidental death and disability, things of that nature. That's one argument. There's the other argument about like retirement contributions. Maybe we shouldn't count those because you're going to tithe on them later. So if theory goes, if you tithe on your retirement contributions now, then you don't have to tithe on it later because you've already tithed on it.
Boy, I never thought about it. I'm going to talk to my wife about that one.
I don't, again, actually, I struggle with that one because I guess I better not talk to her. Because we're forgetting the compounding effect of growth and the fact that, $2 in might become, $40 out. So all of that to say, I would still tithe on both the money as it goes into the 401k and the money as it comes out of the retirement account. That's my personal attitude. So they say that you don't have to tithe on that. Okay. And then, so after looking at these two arguments, our response would be, look, the heart is really the most important thing here. We don't need to play these kind of games. We don't need to think about mathematical games in order to keep more money and justify giving less to God. I don't think that's helpful. So I also don't think that if you're following the full gross for legalistic purposes, that's right. I'm going through right now the story. It's The Prodigal God. It's the book by Tim Keller. If you haven't read it, every Christian should read it. But Tim Keller in his book, Prodigal God, he says that the reason he calls it the prodigal God, not the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal son, is because God was the one who was prodigally spending on his children, lavishly bringing them into his good graces. You see, you have a rebellious and disobedient son who doesn't love the father and just wants the father's things. And then you have an obedient son who never disobeyed, always followed the rules, and yet was also estranged from the father because what he really wanted, his goodness, his obedience, was a means of manipulating the father to get what he wanted out of the father. Both sons were estranged from the father. Both sons were afar off. One afar off because he was trying to live life his own way. The other one afar off because he was doing all the right things, but for all the wrong reasons. So you have to repent not just for your rebellion, but also repent for your righteousness for the wrong reasons. And when I think about how that applies with the gross or the net, my argument is, guys, you're both probably wrong. All of those who are on the gross side, you have to tithe on gross. God's not going to be happy with you if you're not tithing on the gross. You're probably doing the right thing, but for the wrong reason. And then flip it around, all the you net guys out there are probably just trying to do the thing that's the easiest so that you can justify yourself for giving less. Stop playing games with God. Don't give because you think it's going to manipulate God. Don't give a certain amount give less than a certain amount just because you think you can justify it. God's smarter than that. He sees through your games. Give out of your heart. Give out of joy. Give out of gratitude. That's what God requires. So I think the bottom line is that we should probably be giving gross. But I personally, I don't even think about gross or net with me. In fact, I just calculated, I looked at how much I'm given and calculated my salary, my income here, my wife's income. And I'm like, okay, yeah. I'm giving more than gross, because I'm giving more than a tithe. So my attitude is I just give more. I don't even have to think about gross or net because I just give more. I don't set 10% as my baseline. I've increased it, and I'm happy to continue to increase it as I go because God has blessed me. So don't get so caught up on gross or net. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, but the heart matters. But what really matters more than gross or net is, why are you giving? What are you giving to? Who are you giving it for? Are you giving it for you? Are you giving it for the kingdom? Are you giving it stop worrying about gross or net. It's just not helpful. It's not healthy. Give more than a tithe. If you can, give more than a tithe. I would encourage it to be more than a tithe on gross, but again, don't be so fastidious about the percentage and the decimal points. God doesn't care about the decimal points. God cares about your heart and where it is in relation to him.
I wanted to put some practical examples since we last sat down and we scripted this out, because some people just need to hear about me, and you in such a good way laid out the heart key areas. But if it's okay, muse us with some thoughts about some practical examples. Self-employed business owners.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Talk about that.
So that for a business owner, should a business owner tithe? And what should a business owner tithe on? Should they tithe on their revenue? Should they tithe on their profit? Yeah, the answer is don't tithe on your revenue. That's a bad idea. You have to tithe on your increase, and the increase is not revenue. Profit is increase. It's revenue after expenses is your profit. Like you don't have revenue if you don't pay expenses. Like the expenses are what makes the revenue possible, right? So you don't tithe on the big number at the top, the total money in. You tithe on the bottom number, the money that you have after your expenses are taken out. That's profit. So for me, for my family, we're business owners, so we earn profits, and so I tithe on my salary. And then every quarter when I take an owner's distribution, or however often that owner's distribution happens based on, what is happening financially within the business at the time, I tithe on the money that I actually receive out of the business. That to me is my increase. So tithe on your profits, not on your gross revenue. I think that's an important distinction.
Talk about retirement, 401ks, 403bs, all that kind of fun stuff. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I would encourage you not to worry about retirement and do I deduct the contributions going into retirement because I'm going to tithe on it later and pre-tax and post-tax and none of that. My attitude again is your increase is all of your income, including that which you set aside to retirement. Tithe on it. And when you retire and you're drawing money out of your 401k and your retirement plans, pre-tax, post-tax, it doesn't matter. It's your increase. Whether the government taxes it or not is irrelevant. I would tithe on that again. So, but Tim, you're tithing on, you're doing more than a tithe then because you tithe on the front end, you're tithing on the back end. Yeah, well, there's risk involved here. The money that's going in is at risk. I don't know what it's going to be worth at the end. It could be worth less. It could be worth a whole lot more. So my attitude is it's all God's, and I'm going to tithe as I receive it because I need the discipline, the spiritual discipline of actually putting that money aside every single time I get paid so that I'm helping to break the power of money in my life. I'm proving to myself, to the world, and to God that God means more to me than money. So that's why I give when the money goes into the 401k. That's why I give when the money comes out of the 401k.
Love it. I get this question often at our seminar. What about should I tithe on bonuses, tax refunds, side hustle incomes? What are your thoughts, Tim?
Bonuses, yes. I would. It's your increase. Tithe on it. Side income, yes. I would tithe on it. I'm a little on the fences about tax refund because if you're tithing on gross, you've already tithed on that money. It's just money that you've already earned that you've sent to the government. The government's just sending back to you. It's not really an increase. It's just shuffling the account in which it's in. So bonuses, yes. Side income, yes. Refunds, you're welcome to. I don't think you're under an obligation to.
What about those things that are later in life? Social Security income, pensions, things like that.
Yeah. The argument is the Social Security and pension is money that I've been contributing. Well, again, if you're tithing on gross anyway, I would still tithe on your increase. Tithe on your income as you receive it, even in retirement. Again, the principle here is that we're to be led by our heart and by our love and our gratitude, not out of some kind of, what is the minimum amount I have to give for God to be okay with me?
Love what you just said. So to bring this together in our households, we'd encourage you to lean more towards tithing on the gross if you can pull that off. Or maybe you're at the net. Start ratcheting it up year after year till you hit that gross number. And remember, this is your first fruits. Give as the Lord leads. Remember, we've said this last episode, we're saying it again. It's about the heart, and God loves a what kind of giver?
Cheerful.
A cheerful giver. He wants you to be cheerful, glad, joyous, using the Greek word hilarious in your giving. That's the heart behind the generosity. And by doing that, it removes that debate between Gross versus net.
So, gross or net? I think here the math matters less than the motive as we think about giving. So start with your first fruits and give cheerfully as you've decided in your heart, and watch God work. So until next time, God bless, and remember, you can't outgive the one who gave his only son for you. But what a joy it would be to try. See you next week.
Thanks for joining us on the Stewardology Podcast, where financial stewardship and theology meet. We'd like to help you take your next steps in biblical financial stewardship. Subscribe in your podcast provider to get the newest episode delivered to you every week. Leave a 5-star rating and review to help new listeners find the show. Take advantage of your free personal stewardship review at stewardologypodcast.com/review. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website at stewardologypodcast.com for tons of free resources and hundreds of free episodes. You can also leave episode ideas at stewardologypodcast.com/idea. Remember, Psalm 20, verse 7, some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. See you next week.